Night falls on the Giza plateau. The desert cools. The air grows still, and the Great Pyramid stands like a frozen wave of stone. Too vast, too precise, too silent to seem man-made. Beneath its shadow, a question older than civilization itself stirs. Who truly built this monument? For centuries, we have been told a story that fits neatly in textbooks, tour guide spiels, and museum placards, but the closer one looks, the more that story begins to crack. The accepted narrative begins around 2580 BC during Egypt's fourth dynasty. Pharaoh Khufu, or Cheops as Herodotus would later call him, supposedly commissioned his royal architects to build a tomb to secure his path to the afterlife. The logistics alone sound superhuman. Over 2.3 million blocks of stone, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons, stacked with near mechanical precision to a height of 146 meters. Egyptologists estimate that tens of thousands of laborers quarried limestone from Tura, transported granite from Aswan nearly 800 kilometers away, and assembled this mountain in just 2 decades. It is an astonishing claim, an achievement that would require moving and setting one massive block into place every few minutes, every single day, without pause, for 20 years. Yet when you trace the origin of this story, you find most of it is based not on ancient records, but on modern interpretation. The first written description comes from the Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt around 450 BC. This date is key. Herodotus came to Giza some 2,000 years after Khufu's supposed reign. He was as removed from the pyramid builders as we are today from the height of the Roman Empire. Herodotus never saw the construction. He was merely repeating what the local priests told him. They spoke of ramps, of quarries, of 20-year labor projects. But in his honesty as a collector of tales, his records also mention winged machines and divine magic that lifted the stones. These are the details modern historians quietly ignore. To be fair, Herodotus was not a liar. He was a chronicler, part historian, part mythographer. And yet, every modern classroom lesson on the pyramids begins with his second-hand words. For millennia, that was all the world had, a retold folk tale. And when later archaeologists searched for corroborating evidence from Khufu's own time, they found nothing. No papyrus scroll from Khufu's reign describes the construction. No wall painting shows the workers or the tools used. Even the only confirmed statue of Khufu himself, discovered at Abydos, is astonishingly small. It stands just 10 centimeters tall, a tiny ivory figurine, the smallest representation of any great pharaoh. For the builder of humanity's largest stone monument, the archaeological silence is deafening. Still, the story survived, growing stronger with each repetition. It was simple, it was logical, and it put a human face on a seemingly divine structure. This story needed an anchor. It needed physical proof. And in the 19th century, one man believed he found it. He found it not by patiently sifting sand, but with gunpowder. For centuries, the story of Khufu rested only on Herodotus's account. But in 1837, an ambitious British Army colonel arrived at Giza, determined to carve his name into history. His name was Howard Weiss. And the discovery he claimed to find by blasting his way into the structure would become the fragile foundation upon which the entire accepted chronology of ancient Egypt was built. To understand the real story, we must go into the darkness of those sealed chambers and look closer at what Weiss truly found and what he may have left behind. The dawn light creeps across the desert, sliding down the smooth flanks of the pyramid until it glints on the very stones that changed history, or perhaps deceived it. If the story of Khufu as the builder of the Great Pyramid rests on a single discovery, it is the one made by Colonel Howard Weiss in 1837, a set of red-painted hieroglyphs hidden high within the pyramid's interior. The evidence that turned speculation into certainty. The evidence that put Egyptology at ease. But when we return to the chamber where those marks were found and we look with the eyes of both a scientist and a storyteller, the tale of their discovery begins to look more like a confession than a revelation. The man behind that confession, Colonel Richard William Howard Weiss, was not a trained archaeologist. He was an ambitious British officer with an interest in ancient mysteries and a dwindling fortune. Egypt in the 1830s was the Silicon Valley of glory seekers, a place where fame was mined from sand and stone. Men like Giovanni Belzoni, an Italian strongman turned tomb raider, had become legends by unearthing statues, mummies, and treasures for the British Museum. Weiss wanted that same immortality, but upon arriving at Giza, he found himself overshadowed. A younger rival, the skilled explorer Giovanni Caviglia, had already begun exploring the inner chambers of the Great Pyramid, and had the backing of local officials. Frustrated, Weiss used his wealth to outspend and outmuscle his rival, hiring more workers, bribing guards, and eventually locking Caviglia out of the site completely. He seized control of the pyramid the way generals seize fortresses. Then he started blasting. In his own journal, Operations Carried On at the Pyramids of Giza, 1840, Weiss describes how he used gunpowder to force open passages and sealed chambers. The explosions cracked ancient granite, sending dust and smoke through corridors that had been silent for millennia. To later Egyptologists, this approach was near vandalism. To Weiss, it was determination. But after months of destruction, he had nothing to show for it. No inscriptions, no treasure, no discovery worthy of fame. His money was running out, and his reputation among fellow explorers was collapsing. Then, in late March 1837, his luck changed, or so it seemed. While tunneling upward from the so-called King's Chamber, Weiss's team broke into a series of narrow spaces later named the relieving chambers, small hollows designed to distribute the pyramid's weight. On the beams of the uppermost chamber, known today as Campbell's Chamber, his men reported seeing faint red paint marks. They were crudely drawn, dashed onto the granite like graffiti. Among them was a cartouche, a pharaoh's royal name ring, that read, Khnum Khufu. Weiss announced the discovery triumphantly. To him, this was the missing link, the builder's signature, painted into the heart of the monument. Newspapers across Europe celebrated his find. Egyptologists finally had their proof. The Great Pyramid belonged to Khufu, the crowning achievement of the Fourth Dynasty. But from the very beginning, something was wrong. Unlike the finely carved hieroglyphs found in royal tombs, these were crudely painted, uneven, almost hasty. Some of the symbols were misspelled. The hieroglyph for Khufu was drawn with the wrong symbol, one that didn't even exist in his era. Incredibly, that exact same mistake appeared in a hieroglyph reference book published in London just a few years prior, a book that Weiss owned and cited in his notes. Modern researchers have studied photographs and copies of the marks. They point out inconsistencies invisible to the naked eye, brush strokes inconsistent with ancient paint, pigment sitting on top of layers of dust, not beneath them. Chemical analysis in the late 20th century found another clue. The red ochre pigment showed none of the crystallization or mineral degradation that typically affects ancient paint after millennia. Under a microscope, it looked distressingly modern. And then there is the most suspicious detail of all, the absence of any mention of these marks in the original field notes of Weiss's assistants. The first clear reference to the cartouche appears only in Weiss's later journal entries, written after he had fired or fallen out with several of his foremen, including the men who first entered the chamber. A pattern begins to emerge, not of discovery, but of desperation. Imagine Vice that night, empty-handed, mocked, overshadowed, and out of time. A lucky stroke of a brush could turn him from a failure into a legend. All he needed was a pharaoh's name, a few hieroglyphs copied from a book, painted in the dark with red pigment, and the course of Egyptology was altered forever. Was it a forgery? We cannot say for certain, legally, but even cautious historians admit these discrepancies are troubling. Egyptologists rarely discuss this publicly. The foundation of the entire chronology depends on those red marks being real. Because if they are not, if the name of Khufu in the pyramid is a Victorian fabrication, then the monument becomes undated. It could belong to the Bronze Age or the Ice Age. And that opens a door no one in mainstream archaeology wants to walk through. The irony is stunning. The entire chronology of ancient Egypt, its dynasties, its pharaohs, its cultural sequence, rests on a few centimeters of red pigment discovered by a man using dynamite in a rush for fame. The real story of the Great Pyramid does not end with the brushstroke of a British explorer. It begins there, because the moment we admit its authorship might be uncertain, we must face the next question. When was it really built? To answer that, we must leave Weiss's 19th century scandal behind and follow the scientists who tried to measure time itself through carbon, stone, and light, and discovered that the pyramid doesn't just defy forgery, it defies dating. Dating a stone monument sounds simple, until you try. Stone contains no organic matter. There is no carbon to measure, no clock to read. It does not decay. It endures. To science, it is mute. And so archaeologists have spent decades trying to make the pyramid speak in other ways, through its mortar, through its relics, and through its alignment. But each time the evidence shatters into contradictions. The first serious attempt came in 1984, when Egyptologist Mark Lenner and a team of researchers funded by the Edgar Cayce Foundation conducted a radiocarbon study on the pyramid's mortar. This technique, known as carbon-14 dating, measures the decay of radioactive carbon isotopes in material that was once living. In this case, it was the tiny flecks of straw, charcoal, or plant fiber mixed into the ancient lime mortar used to bind the blocks. Their results, published in Archaeology magazine, seemed to confirm the orthodox view. The dates centered around 2500 BC, conveniently matching Khufu's supposed reign. Egyptologists celebrated. The Great Pyramid, they said, was finally scientifically dated. But a closer look at the raw data told a very different story. The samples were not consistent. They varied wildly. Some differed by as much as 380 years, significantly older or younger than Khufu. One fragment even dated to nearly 3000 BC, centuries before his dynasty began. The team explained away these differences. They attributed it to the old wood problem, meaning the builders had reused organic materials from previous generations. That explanation, while neat, hides a deeper logical problem. It is a circular argument. It assumes the very thing it is trying to prove. It says, we know the pyramid was built in 2500 BC. Therefore, any data that doesn't say that must be contamination or old material. The scientific reality is much messier. Mortar does not necessarily represent original construction. It represents maintenance. Over the millennia, the pyramid has been repaired many times, by pharaohs, by late-period priests, by medieval rulers, and by modern restorers. What the 1984 study actually measured could be anything from Old Kingdom patch mortar to material inserted during Roman-era repairs. Put simply, dating the mortar is like dating the dust on your bookshelf and calling it the age of your house. It only tells you when the last piece of living matter in that mortar died, not when the stone was laid. Later studies only deepened the confusion. In the 1990s, researchers from the University of Zurich reanalyzed similar samples. Again, they found massive discrepancies, some as much as 1,000 years apart. A few pieces even dated to before Egyptian civilization as we know it. When independent researchers requested new, undisturbed samples to test with more modern methods, access was abruptly denied. Official statements cited preservation concerns. Unofficially, it seemed no one wanted any more anomalies messing up the already written textbook. The mortar debate quieted, not because it was solved, but because it was too inconvenient. But if the mortar, the external maintenance material, was so unreliable, what if something was found inside the structure itself? An organic material, locked away in a sealed shaft, untouched by later repairmen. For over a century, no such object existed, until in 2020, an accident in a Scottish museum changed everything. While sorting through old collections at the University of Aberdeen, a curatorial assistant named Abir Eladani stumbled upon a small cigar box. Inside, wrapped in a newspaper from 1946, was a piece of cedarwood, dark, dry, and a faded label, "From the Great Pyramid. Dixon Relic." This was no ordinary souvenir. This was a piece of a lost mystery. And the date it would reveal would not just challenge the reign of Khufu, it would challenge the very beginning of Egyptian history. That piece of cedar, discovered by chance in a Scottish cigar box, was more than an anomaly. It was a crack in the very foundation of the chronology. Its date, 500 to 800 years before Khufu, posed an unavoidable question. If the material to build the pyramid predates its supposed builder, what are we looking at? A centuries-long project? Or an inherited legacy? Scholars rush to explain it away. Cedar trees can live for hundreds of years. Perhaps it was already old wood when used. Perhaps it was contaminated. But this was the only organic relic ever found locked inside the Great Pyramid's original structure. And it told an older story. And if one piece of wood can shake history, what happens when the very bedrock beneath it speaks? The whispers we hear don't just come from the pyramids. They echo from the plateau's bedrock itself. And they rise to a roar from another witness, one that has seen it all, the Great Sphinx. For centuries, the Sphinx was assumed to be the guardian of Khufu's tomb, or perhaps his son Khafra. It was assumed to have been carved from the same limestone at the same time. But in the 1990s, a geologist from Boston University, Dr. Robert Schoch, looked at the Sphinx not as an Egyptologist, but as a rock scientist. He ignored the face, which had clearly been recarved multiple times over the millennia, and focused on the body and the walls of the enclosure surrounding it. What he found challenged every assumption. He did not find the sharp horizontal cuts of wind and sand erosion. Instead, he found unmistakable evidence of heavy precipitation erosion, deep, rounded vertical fissures, cracks and gullies created not by millennia of blowing wind, but by millennia of water pouring down from the sky, cascading over the body and the enclosure walls. Desert wind does not create this pattern of erosion. Water does. Here is the core problem. That kind of wet, rainy climate has not existed in Giza since at least 5,000 BC. It belongs to another era entirely, a period known to geologists when the Sahara was a wet, green savanna. The date Schoch proposed for the Sphinx, based on the geology, was not 2,500 BC. It was 7,000 to 10,000 BC. Millennia before the first Egyptian pharaoh supposedly unified the kingdom. The reaction from mainstream Egyptology was immediate and fierce. It was rising groundwater, they argued, or early morning dew. But geology is a harsh science. Wind creates horizontal cuts. Water flows from the top down. The evidence is carved into the limestone for anyone willing to read it. Now take a step back. Look at the entire picture these pieces paint. We have a mainstream story that Khufu built it, based on the writing of a Greek historian, Herodotus, visiting 2,000 years later. We have the only physical evidence tying it to Khufu, the red paint marks, by Weiss, which are highly likely to be a 19th century forgery done out of desperation and for fame. We have scientific dating attempts of the mortar, carbon-14, that show contradictory results spanning thousands of years, suggesting continuous maintenance, not a single construction. We have the only organic relic recovered from inside the structure, the Dixon wood, which dates 500 years before Khufu. And finally, we have the bedrock itself, the Sphinx and its enclosure, showing water erosion marks from a climate era that ended millennia before the first dynasty began. The story of Khufu survives not because the evidence supports it, but because it is convenient. It is simpler to believe in the genius of a known dynasty than to confront a global amnesia. A truth that there may have been another advanced civilization on Earth, one that understood physics and astronomy to a degree we are only now beginning to catch up with, one that was wiped clean by some cataclysm, leaving only these mute structures as markers. So, who built them? The truth is we don't know. We have inherited relics from an age we no longer have the language to describe. As night falls again on the Giza plateau and the desert air cools, the Great Pyramid ceases to be an answer. It is the eternal question. It is not a tomb for a king. It is an heirloom, not of one man named Khufu, but of a lost memory of mankind. And it waits, in its stone silence, for us to finally be ready to hear its real story. Beneath the sand, where time seems to stand still, archaeologists found the impossible, a limestone pavement, heavily eroded. These marks were not the work of desert wind. Wind creates sharp, flat cuts. These were deep, rounded grooves, telling a completely different story, a story of rain, a lot of rain, rainfall that vanished from the region's climate record millennia ago. The enclosure wall of the Sphinx, right beside the pyramid, bears those same unmistakable signatures. Deep channels carved by water, not wind. The geologist, Dr. Robert Schoch, after conducting a detailed stratigraphic study, reached a conclusion that shook the foundations of history. This erosion could not have happened in the age of the pharaohs. It had to have happened long before. He dated it to around 9,000 to 7,000 BC. This is a date that aligns with the final floods of the last ice age. If that is accurate, then the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid do not belong to Khufu's Egypt. They belong to a world before, a world that vanished as the Sahara dried, and civilization, as we know it, had to reboot. Yet, mainstream archaeology resists this conclusion. They have to, because it destabilizes everything built upon it. Not just the timeline of Egypt, but of humanity itself. If the Great Pyramid is older than writing itself, then civilized history is not 5,000 years long, but perhaps 12,000, deep in the Younger Dryas, an era when global sea levels rose and ancient coastlines were submerged. The question then shifts from who built it to what were they trying to preserve? When engineers analyzed the pyramid structure via luminescence dating, a method that measures trapped electrons in minerals to determine the last time the stone was exposed to sunlight, they found inconclusive results. Some blocks showed dates older than Khufu, others younger. Even the light trapped in its crystals refused to confirm the official story. The pyramid resists measurement, the way a mountain resists being named. And so, scientists have begun to see it for what it might truly be: a palimpsest, an ancient manuscript scraped clean and written over layer upon layer through time. Perhaps it is an ancient core, refurbished by later dynasties, repurposed as a royal tomb, then a temple, then an icon. A monument so old that each civilization that passed simply claimed it as its own, anew. In that sense, Khufu may not have built the Great Pyramid at all. He may have simply inherited it, restored it, and left his name where the previous hands had long since vanished. The carbon fragments, the cedar shard, the uneven data, all suggest that beneath the known history of Egypt lies a deeper, older foundation. The Great Pyramid, it seems, does not belong to any one era. It belongs to time itself, but if its age stretches back into the dim dawn of prehistory, the next question arrives naturally. How was it built? Because the further back we push its origins, the more absurd its construction becomes, until we are forced to confront an impossible reality, that the technology behind it did not just predate Egypt, but perhaps predated everything we call civilization. Imagine it, standing on the Giza plateau over 4 millennia ago, or perhaps much, much further back. Thousands of men moving in rhythm under the searing Egyptian sun, dust hanging in the air, the pounding of drums, and ropes straining, pulling blocks the size of buses, inch by inch over the sand. That is the picture we have been taught to believe. The power of human will against the immovable, the miracle of manpower building the impossible. But when we translate that picture into numbers, into engineering, into actual physics, the story begins to fall apart. The Great Pyramid is not just big, it is mathematically absurd. It rises 146.6 meters. Its base covers over 13 acres, an area large enough to fit St. Peter's Basilica, Westminster Abbey, and the cathedrals of Florence and Milan. Combined, each of its sides is aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal points of the compass. Its total weight? An estimated 6.5 million tons. To complete such a structure in 20 years, as the textbooks claim, would require moving and fitting 2.3 million blocks, averaging 2.5 tons each. That means one block placed into position every 2 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 2 solid decades. Even today, with cranes, bulldozers, and laser-guided equipment, no construction project of that scale achieves that rate of speed and precision. Now imagine doing it all with bronze chisels and stone hammers. Bronze has a hardness of 3 on the Mohs scale. The granite used for the pyramid's inner chambers, meanwhile, has a hardness of 6 to 7. In modern tests, bronze chisels barely scratch granite before buckling. The experimental archaeologist Dennis Stocks attempted to replicate ancient cutting techniques. After hours of constant pounding, his team managed to cut a few millimeters into limestone, but the tools wore down faster than they cut the stone. Against granite, they were entirely useless. To shape just one of the 80-ton granite beams in the king's chamber using such tools would require thousands of chisels, constant reforging, and months of labor per block. Multiply that by hundreds, and the logistics become unimaginable. Archaeologists have long proposed that the Egyptians used dolerite-pounding stones to chip away at the granite surfaces. But even dolerite is brittle. Photographs of the ancient quarries at Aswan show round pits and clean tool marks that look more like drilling than pounding. When engineers study these grooves under magnification, they find helical striations, the signature of a rotating tool, not a hammer. These grooves descend in continuous spiral patterns, consistent with a rotary drill bit, as if the stone was being carved by high-speed machinery. To test this, engineer Christopher Dunn, an expert in precision manufacturing, created computer models of these marks. The result? The feed rate of the tool, how fast it cut through the granite, was consistent with a drill turning thousands of times per minute, exerting a pressure far beyond what human hands could manage. In modern industry, similar marks only appear on materials shaped by diamond-tipped tools or ultrasonic cutting equipment. If the ancient Egyptians achieved the same pattern with just copper tubes and sand, as the mainstream theory claims, they would have needed centuries just to complete the inner chambers, and the transportation adds another layer of impossibility. Some of the granite beams inside the pyramid weigh up to 80 tons. They were quarried at Aswan, over 800 kilometers to the south. How were they moved? The obvious answer is the Nile River, a natural highway. But physics intervenes. The flotation limit of a wooden barge of that size would be overcome by even a fraction of that weight. In the 1990s, modern naval engineers replicated such a barge design. The moment they loaded 60 tons of granite onto it, the ship cracked and sank. Even if they managed to get them to Giza by river, how were the stones pulled from the riverbank up to the plateau? The mainstream suggests ramps. However, to achieve the necessary gradient for a smooth pull, such ramps would have had to stretch for over a mile and contain more material than the pyramid itself. Not a single trace of such a ramp remains. No foundation, no spoil heap, none of the massive clay pits needed to build it. Some propose a spiral ramp winding around the pyramid's exterior, but this theory also fails under scrutiny. A winding ramp would have obscured the builder's lines of sight, making the precise angular alignment impossible. It also would have required the removal of millions of tons of debris after construction, a task for which no evidence exists. Modern experiments have tried to put these theories to the test. In 1978, Japan's Nippon Television Corporation, working with Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, embarked on building a miniature replica of the Great Pyramid, using only the supposedly available ancient materials and techniques. Their pyramid was to be 20 meters high, a fraction of the original. From the start, it was a disaster. Bronze chisels could not shape even the small limestone blocks. Ropes snapped. Workers could not pull the stones over the sand without lubrication. They poured water to reduce friction, an ancient technique suggested in murals, but the sledges still bogged down and stuck. Eventually, the team resorted to modern steel tools and diesel-powered cranes, just to lift the smaller blocks. Even then, their pyramid reached only 10 meters, half their goal, before the project was abandoned. The conclusion, recorded quietly in their final report, was, "No known ancient techniques could account for the precision or scale of the Great Pyramid's construction." To achieve the precision of Giza today, engineers would need laser alignment systems, GPS calibration, and 100-ton capacity hydraulic cranes. And yet, somehow, according to mainstream history, Bronze Age builders accomplished it, with nothing more than rope, wood, and human sweat. Let us pause to visualize it scientifically. Each side of the Great Pyramid measures 230.4 meters, and the difference in length between the longest and shortest side is less than 2 centimeters. The foundation is leveled flat to within 1.5 centimeters over 13 acres, a level of accuracy equivalent to modern high-rise construction. The structure's orientation to true north is off by only 3 minutes of arc, 0.05 degrees. Even the Hubble Space Telescope, built with computers and lasers, has manufacturing tolerances in the same range. How did a Bronze Age society achieve accuracy that rivals modern aerospace engineering? Some researchers have proposed imaginative but testable theories. The pyramid's geometry, its angles and ratios, suggest the builders understood not just geometry, but geodesy, the curvature of the Earth. The base perimeter multiplied by 43,200 equals the Earth's equatorial circumference. Its height multiplied by that same number, gives the polar radius. These relationships are not coincidental. They require knowledge of the planet's size, shape, and axial tilt. If the builders knew such measurements, they possessed advanced surveying methods. But how? No evidence for such tools exists from Khufu's time. The Egyptians themselves seem to believe this. In temple inscriptions at Saqqara, priests describe records of the first time and plans of the ancestors, suggesting the blueprints for these monuments were inherited, not invented. The paradox becomes clearer the closer we look. The Great Pyramid is both simple and impossible. 4 triangles on a square base, yet executed with a precision that shames modern engineers. Its construction demands an understanding of math, logistics, and material science that defies its supposed date. So if it wasn't built by 4th dynasty Egyptians with only bronze tools and sweat, how was it built? Stand at the base of the Great Pyramid, and it is easy to be overwhelmed by its scale. But move closer. Run your hand along its surface, and something far stranger emerges. What at first looks like rough, weathered stone resolves into a study of impossible precision. Each block meets its neighbor with surgical accuracy. The joints between them are thinner than a sheet of paper. For centuries, scholars have tried to explain how Bronze Age masons could create such perfection. Yet, every answer dissolves against the evidence, leaving only the paradox itself. The oldest monument on Earth is also the most precise. Start with the measurements. When the 19th century surveyor Flinders Petrie, one of the most meticulous field scientists of his time, brought his instruments to Giza, he expected to find imperfections. What he found astonished him. The base of the Great Pyramid covers over 13 acres, yet the difference in elevation between its corners is less than 2 centimeters. The 4 sides are off true north by only 3 minutes and 6 seconds of arc. That is 1/20th of a single degree. Even with GPS and lasers, modern engineers rarely achieve this on a project of that scale. So how did men working with ropes, plumb bobs, and bronze chisels create such an alignment? Egyptologists propose that surveyors sighted the stars, using the pole star Thuban in the constellation Draco to mark north. But astronomers have calculated that in 2500 BC, Thuban was slightly off true north, enough to create a much larger error than the pyramid exhibits. In effect, the Great Pyramid's orientation is more accurate than observatories built 4,000 years later. The deeper you go, the stranger it gets. The casing stones, which once covered the pyramid, were cut so precisely that modern restorers struggle to replicate them. Some joints measure less than 0.5 millimeter. Their surfaces were polished to an optical flatness. Engineers from France's Institute of Engineering and Construction Research studied the remaining blocks in the 1990s and found tolerances, equivalent to precision-machined metal. One engineer described it as the precision of an airplane wing, applied to millions of tons of stone. The foundation blocks beneath the visible layers show similar mastery. Ground-penetrating radar shows interlocking bedrock terraces, designed to distribute the weight evenly across the plateau. The result? After thousands of years of earthquakes, sandstorms, and temperature changes, the pyramid has not settled or shifted by more than a few millimeters. Even the internal architecture follows laws of precision impossible for its supposed era. The Grand Gallery, a 47-meter-long corridor leading to the king's chamber, is built of granite blocks so tight that air cannot pass between them. The gallery's incline, 26 degrees, exactly matches the angle of the pyramid's exterior face, suggesting a deliberate harmonic resonance. The ceiling is corbelled, each layer overhanging the last by a few centimeters, relieving structural stress with mathematical efficiency. This technique, was not rediscovered in modern engineering until the cantilever principle was developed in the 19th century. And then there are the tool marks, the tiny signatures left in the stone. Inside the pyramid on the granite beams of the king's chamber are helical grooves, consistent with mechanical drilling. Engineer Christopher Dunn, a master machinist, measured these grooves and found a uniform thread pitch. This means the cutting head advanced at a fixed rate, as if driven by a lathe or a rotary drill, operating at thousands of revolutions per minute. Lab tests using copper drills and sand fail to replicate those patterns. They leave only rough, uneven scratches, not the clean, concentric circles, visible on the ancient stone. The same precision appears on blocks in nearby temples. At Abydos, granite boxes cut from single blocks show internal corners that are perfect right angles, verified by modern laser alignment tools. Their surfaces are flat to 1/10,000th of an inch, a standard used today in aerospace manufacturing. And yet, these artifacts are attributed to dynasties that supposedly lacked even iron tools or advanced metrology. To dismiss these anomalies as coincidence is to ignore the absolute consistency of the precision across the entire site. Every block in the pyramid, millions of them, fits into a precise geometry so exact that when the structure was intact, its height-to-base ratio encoded the mathematical constant pi to 3 decimal places. Its angles express the golden ratio, found in nature and later in the art of Da Vinci. The precision was not random. It was systematic, as if every dimension adhered to a unified design code. But what if the ancient builders didn't rely on fire at all? Deep within the temple of Hathor at Dendera, over 400 kilometers south of Giza, there is a relief that has baffled archaeologists for decades. It depicts priests holding objects shaped like elongated light bulbs. Inside each bulb is a winding, snake-like shape, connected by a cable to a box-like object. Some researchers interpret these as stylized symbols of creation, but others, including electrical engineer Eric Vondin, argue this relief depicts an ancient lighting device. He calls it the Dendera light. When engineers built a physical model of this bulb using materials available in antiquity, quartz, copper, and an acidic electrolyte, it produced a faint glow, similar to a low-voltage discharge tube. To mainstream science, this remains speculation. However, intriguing chemical residues found inside the crypts of the Dendera temple show traces of zinc and sulfur compounds, byproducts of electroplating reactions. Is it a coincidence? Perhaps. But it suggests an ancient awareness of energy that far exceeds what textbooks allow. Now, consider the materials of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its core and inner chambers are built of Aswan granite. This stone contains high levels of quartz and feldspar minerals, materials with piezoelectric properties. When subjected to pressure or vibration, these crystals generate a small electrical charge. Surrounding that granite were the outer casing slabs of white Tura limestone, a powerful insulator. In modern engineering, this combination, an inner conductor encased by an insulating shell, forms a resonant cavity, a structure capable of focusing and amplifying energy. Could the pyramid itself have functioned as a giant resonant structure? An energy converter, turning vibration into electricity or light? In 2018, physicists at ITMO University in St. Petersburg, in collaboration with Laser Zentrum Hanover, created a mathematical model of how electromagnetic waves interact with the pyramid's shape. Their simulations revealed that, at certain resonant frequencies, the internal chambers and the area beneath the pyramid's base would concentrate electromagnetic energy into the structure's core and foundation. The study, published in the Journal of Applied Physics, concluded that the pyramid's geometry allows it to focus and amplify natural electromagnetic waves. This doesn't prove it glowed like a light bulb, but it raises an incredibly compelling possibility. Perhaps the illumination came not from fire or reflection, but from resonance. The evidence is not limited to mathematics. When modern acoustic researchers tested the king's chamber, they discovered something extraordinary. It hums. At a frequency of 110 to 120 hertz, the granite walls begin to vibrate and sing. When that sound is harmonized with lower frequencies, specifically around 8 hertz, the Earth's own electromagnetic Schumann resonance, the entire room becomes a perfect resonance chamber. In the darkness, the granite glows faintly on infrared cameras. It is heated not by flame, but by vibration itself. To the builders, this may not have been technology as we know it, but sacred physics. It was the harnessing of sound, energy, and geometry to create light, power, or even altered states of consciousness. Ancient Egyptian texts describe the gods as the shining ones, and refer to priests as keepers of the glowing fire that produces no smoke. These are poetic phrases, yes, but what if they are preserving the memory of something entirely real? A glowing fire without smoke. This evidence of sacred physics is not limited to Giza. Archaeologists have found other hints that Egypt's earliest temples were engineered for resonance, not ritual. At the subterranean Serapeum complex in Saqqara, massive granite sarcophagi, each weighing up to 70 tons, are carved with impossible precision. When struck, they do not make the dull thud of stone. They ring like giant tuning forks. At the Osirian in Abydos, chambers are carved directly into the bedrock. They produce identical low-frequency vibrations, what acousticians call standing waves. The ancient builders may have used these deliberately, amplifying sound and perhaps light in ways we can barely comprehend today. Some mainstream historians dismiss these findings, calling them pseudoscience. However, they ignore an indisputable fact. The precision required to create such perfect resonant spaces perfectly matches the millimeter-perfect precision of the Great Pyramid's construction itself. Every angle, every chamber, every corridor seems to be tuned, as if the entire structure was not a tomb, but a colossal musical instrument designed to play in concert with the earth. When visitors today stand inside the king's chamber and make a low humming sound, they often describe a strange sensation, a tingling on the skin, a lightness in the chest. Some even report flashes of light in the corners of their eyes. Some call it imagination. Others call it induction. Either way, the experience suggests the Great Pyramid interacts with the human body at frequencies we rarely perceive. So perhaps the light of the pyramid was never the physical light we search for. Perhaps it was something deeper, an enlightenment of the mind, an awakening of consciousness triggered by pure resonance, a way to make those who entered inside see without using their eyes. Whatever its function, one thing has become clear. The Great Pyramid was not built merely to house a corpse. Every measurement, every material, every chamber serves a physical and mathematical purpose. And if that purpose involved light, energy, or resonance, then we are not dealing with primitive builders. We are dealing with a civilization that understood the very language of the earth. In the next part, we will step out of the darkness of resonance and back into the light of day. We will turn to the kings who claimed these monuments as their own, because a thorny question remains. What if the Egyptians didn't build the Great Pyramid at all? What if they simply found it, waiting, already ancient, already glowing in the sun, and rewrote history to make it their own? As we walk through the great halls of Egypt's museums, every statue and stela bears a familiar motif, rows of hieroglyphs declaring who built what, who ruled, who conquered, names carved deep into stone, as if to anchor them against the flow of time. And yet, if you look very closely, you will see something strange. Many of those names have been carved over other names. Beneath the name of Ramesses is another faint script. Beneath the name of Seti is another half-erased cartouche. The Egyptians were not just masters of building. They were masters of appropriation. They didn't just build monuments, they inherited them and rewrote them. This act has a name: usurpation. In modern language, it means to seize by force, but to an ancient Egyptian, it meant succession, a pharaoh stepping into the power of his divine predecessors. Carving over an older name was not sacrilege, it was sanctification. Through this ritual of rewriting, however, the truth itself was obscured. Temples, statues, even gods were re-identified. Over centuries, dynasty after dynasty polished the past and carved its own reflection into it. Nowhere is this clearer than in the reign of Ramesses II, known as Ramesses the Great, the builder pharaoh. His image dominates Egypt. Colossal sitting statues, temples rising from cliffsides, inscriptions praising him as the architect of every wonder. But archaeology tells a quieter story. Ramesses built a great deal, yes, but he also claimed far more than he built. At Abydos, Ramesses' inscriptions lie over the reliefs of his father, Seti I, where chisels scraped away the older hieroglyphs. At Luxor Temple, his cartouche appears over the name of Amenhotep III, whose colossal statues Ramesses simply renamed. Even the great temple of Abu Simbel, thought to be entirely Ramesses's, shows signs of modification, not original creation. The rock beneath the newer reliefs is eroded. They were ancient even in his time. The pharaoh who sought eternal fame may have achieved it by stamping his identity onto the memory of those who came before. If usurpation was common practice in Egypt's later dynasties, could it have happened in the Fourth Dynasty, or even before? Let us return to the Great Pyramid. The only evidence connecting it to Pharaoh Khufu is the red-painted cartouche found by Howard Weiss, a hastily drawn, misspelled, and suspicious smear of paint. Beyond those few marks, not one inscription anywhere, on any wall in any corridor, names Khufu as the builder. No temple relief shows his workers hauling limestone. No papyrus describes the construction. No statue commemorates the achievement. For the greatest architectural project in human history, there is only silence. Meanwhile, the smaller nearby pyramids, supposedly built later, do bear inscriptions. They even have decorated chambers filled with texts and art. A paradox. The oldest and largest structure is, ironically, the most anonymous. Archaeology provides another clue: the recycling of monuments all over Egypt. Entire temples were re-identified. Djoser's step pyramid at Saqqara, celebrated as the first pyramid, was expanded and modified by later kings. Yet its core structures predate Djoser. The Osirion at Abydos, a massive subterranean complex carved from granite blocks, lies 6 meters below the temple of Seti I. It shows water erosion, far older than Seti's reign. Seti's builders simply incorporated it, carving hieroglyphs onto its already ancient walls and claiming it as their own. Even in the shadow of the Sphinx, the evidence suggests layered ownership. Restoration inscriptions from Thutmose IV describe him awakening the monument from the sand, after it had been buried since the time of the ancestors. His dream stela makes no claim to building the Sphinx, only rediscovering it. To archaeologists, this is not shocking. It is standard practice. Dynasties inherited, renovated, and reused. But when this is applied to the Great Pyramid, the implications are staggering. If Khufu merely refurbished or re-sanctified an existing monument, adding his name, his temple, and his royal causeway, then the pyramid could be millennia older than his reign. Its original builders, whoever they were long since gone. The builders were long gone, but perhaps they left a trace, not in royal decrees, but in myths. Ancient Egyptian priestly texts hint at just such a scenario. The Egyptian historian Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BC, described Egypt's history as beginning not with pharaohs. He described it as a succession of ages, the reign of the gods, then the demigods, and finally the mortal kings. The divine kings, called the Shemsu Hor, or followers of Horus, were said to have ruled for thousands of years before Menes unified Egypt around 3100 BC. To the priests of Heliopolis, this primordial era was known as Zep Tepi, the first time, a golden age when gods walked the earth and built the sacred structures perfectly aligned with the stars. Modern Egyptologists label Zep Tepi as mythology, and yet mythology often encodes memory. In Sumer, similar tales tell of kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years before a great flood. In India, Sanskrit texts describe previous yugas, cycles of rise and fall, long before our own recorded age. The consistency of these traditions suggests that the idea of a first civilization is not fantasy. It may be an ancestral memory. And so we must face a provocative question. Was Khufu's Egypt the inheritor, and not the inventor, of the pyramid tradition? Consider how later Egyptians themselves treated the Great Pyramid. To them, it was not a tomb, it was a temple of mystery. In the Greek and Roman periods, priests and scholars entered its chambers seeking divine knowledge. They called it the Pillar of Enoch, or the Sanctuary of Thoth. Later, Islamic chroniclers called it an archive of ancient wisdom built before the Great Flood. Even the 10th century historian al-Masudi wrote that the pyramids were built by a pre-dynastic king to preserve knowledge from an impending deluge. It seems each successive generation draped the monument in its own layer of interpretation. They rewrote not only who built it, but what it meant. The pharaohs carved their names. The Greeks turned it into philosophy. The Arabs turned it into myth. And in each retelling, the true builders receded further into shadow. Ironically, modern archaeology seems to be continuing that same tradition. We, too, rewrite the past to fit our comfort. We accept Weiss's dubious paint smear evidence because it provides a simple answer. We ignore the anomalies that don't fit the established timeline. We declare the mystery solved because it must be solved. To admit uncertainty is to shake the very foundations of history. But the stones do not lie. Their precision, their erosion, their silent geometry. They all point to an origin far beyond the age of Khufu. The Great Pyramid is not an isolated marvel of Egyptian ambition. It is the echo of something more ancient, the blueprint of a forgotten age, re-identified by those who came after. If Khufu was not the builder, then who? And what knowledge did that previous civilization possess to be able to shape stone with such impossible mastery? To answer that, we must turn to the language of the builders themselves, a language written not in hieroglyphs, but in numbers and stars, because etched into the very dimensions of the Great Pyramid is a message from a vanished world, a mathematical codex, still speaking to us across time. Amidst the vastness of sand and the silence of the Giza plateau, there is a number carved in stone. It is written not in letters, but in the very proportions of the greatest monument, 43,200. The probability of achieving this precision by chance alone is virtually unthinkable. The ratio is 1 to 43,200. This number itself is not a random one. It is a multiple, a rhythm, of 86,400. This is the exact number of seconds in one full rotational day of the Earth. Ponder this for a moment. These silent, multi-million-ton blocks do not just encode the dimensions of the Earth. They encode its rotational rhythm. Whoever designed the Great Pyramid, they didn't just build a monument, they built a scale model of our planet, a three-dimensional map in stone, anchoring the Earth to the numbers of the cosmos. To achieve this feat, the builders must have known two things. First, the precise circumference of the Earth. And second, a concept we believe is modern, that the Earth is a sphere. These are discoveries that history credits to Eratosthenes, the great Greek mathematician and astronomer, around 240 BC. But the Great Pyramid predates him by more than 2,000 years. So, the question must be asked, did the ancient Egyptians, in the Bronze Age, calculate these measurements themselves? Or did they inherit this knowledge? Inherit it from a much older culture, a vanished culture, capable of mapping the globe with astronomical precision. But the code does not stop there. As we dig deeper into the pyramid's geometry, the fundamental constants of the universe begin to emerge. If you take the perimeter of the pyramid's base and divide it by twice its original height, you get a number, 3.14159. Pi, the eternal mathematical constant, defining the relationship between the circumference and diameter of every circle. And if you measure the height of one sloping face and divide it by half the length of its base, you find another number, 1.618. The golden ratio, phi, the ratio of life. These are not just numbers. In sacred geometry, they are symbols. Pi represents the infinite, the circle with no beginning or end. It is the eternal, the immeasurable. Phi represents life, the generative ratio by which matter organizes itself. It is found in the branches of a tree, in the spiral of a seashell, in the petals of a flower, and even in the spiraling arms of distant galaxies. When you put them together, pi and phi, at the very heart of this structure, they represent creation, eternity and life. And so the Great Pyramid can be read as a cosmic equation, life emerging from eternity. This understanding does not exist only in Egypt. It echoes across continents like a dim memory, a shared human legacy. Go to Chichen Itza in Mexico. The Mayan pyramid of Kukulkan encodes the solar year in its 365 steps. Go to the majestic temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia. They are intricately aligned with the precessional cycles of the Earth, a great cosmic cycle of 25,920 years. This number, the Great Year, is the same number known to the ancient Egyptians. From continent to continent, the same constants, the same celestial ratios, repeated over and over, as if all these ancient builders, though separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, were reading from the same instruction book, a manual on the mathematics of the gods. Modern science calls this coincidence. But coincidence, when repeated with such precision and frequency, begins to sound like a language. If the Great Pyramid truly encodes the constants of the Earth, of the heavens, and of the laws of vibration, then it is not mere architecture. It is data preserved through geometry. A message written not in ink or glyph, but in proportion itself. And if that is true, It may be the oldest scientific document in human history, a record in stone, from a civilization that understood the universe as number, as sound, and as light, long before our own equations rediscovered those same truths. We have looked at the numbers on the ground, but the real message may not be here at all. In the next part, we will look up, towards the stars that seem to mirror the Giza Plateau itself, because the image of Orion etched in the night sky may not be a random myth, but a cosmic blueprint, the key to understanding when, and perhaps by whom, this pyramid was truly raised. As night falls on the Giza Plateau, the desert becomes a silent sea. The air chills and the stars begin to pour across the black vault, countless points of light, ancient and eternal. From this height, standing before the Great Pyramid, the horizon itself seems to curve. The apex of the great structure points straight up like a compass needle, and suddenly you begin to understand. This entire complex was not built just for the earth. It was built for the heavens. For millennia, the Egyptians called their land Tameri, the beloved land. But they also called it Kemet, the fertile black land. To them, the sky was not an empty void. It was a mirror of the divine world, a cosmic Nile flowing parallel above the earthly Nile. And the Great Pyramid was the intersection, the axis mundi, where heaven and earth met. In 1993, the engineer and researcher Robert Bauval made an observation that forever changed how we see Giza. Studying aerial photographs of the three pyramids, he noticed something strange. The three pyramids are not in a perfect line, as most people assume. The smallest pyramid, that of King Menkore, is offset slightly to the south. It was a detail few had questioned, until Bauval realized that the exact same offset appears in the three stars of Orion's belt, Al-Nitak, Al-Nilam, and Mintaka. When he superimposed a map of Orion over the Giza layout, the alignment was near perfect. Their relative positions and sizes matched. The largest star corresponded to the largest pyramid, the smallest star to the smallest pyramid. The offset matched. The Giza Plateau, it seemed, was not a random architectural project. It was a celestial reflection, a map of Orion laid out on the sands of Egypt. But Bauval's discovery didn't stop there. Using astronomical software, he calculated Orion's position over millennia, adjusting for the precession of the Earth's axis, the slow wobble of the planet that changes the apparent position of the stars over time. He wound back the clock of the cosmos, and he found one moment when the stars of Orion aligned with absolute precision with the pyramids on the ground. The celestial clock pointed to the year 10,500 BC. That number is not just outside the reign of King Khufu. It predates the very beginning of Egyptian civilization. It falls near the end of the Younger Dryas Ice Age, a time of global upheaval, of great floods, sudden climate change, and the extinction of Ice Age megafauna. This is the same era to which other mysterious structures seem to converge. The Temple of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the rain-eroded body of the Sphinx, and the ancient flood sediments in Mesopotamia. Were the builders of Giza memorializing an older sky, an astronomical memory of a world that was destroyed? Mainstream scholars dismiss Bauval's conclusion, arguing the alignment is coincidence. And yet, the coincidences keep piling up. The relative brightness of the pyramids matched the brightness of the Orion stars. Khufu's pyramid corresponds to Al-Nitak, the brightest star, Khafra's to Al-Nilam, and Menkara's to Mintaka, the dimmest. Their layout mirrors not just Orion, but its angle relative to the Milky Way. When viewed from above, the Nile River flowing past Giza is exactly as the Milky Way flows past Orion in that ancient sky. A cosmic river mirrored on Earth. The Egyptians themselves called the Milky Way the winding waterway of the gods. The dead were believed to sail along it after death, guided by the constellation Sa, the divine name for Orion, towards eternal life. In this cosmic mythology, Orion represented Osiris, the god of rebirth, while the bright, nearby star Sirius represented his wife, the goddess Isis. Now look again at the ventilation shafts inside the pyramid. The southern shaft from the king's chamber points directly to Orion's belt. The northern shaft points to Thuban, the pole star of that era. Meanwhile, the queen's chamber's southern shaft aims directly at Sirius, and its northern shaft points to Kochab in the Little Dipper. These are not random tunnels. They are celestial sightlines, connecting the earthly world of the kings with the heavenly realm of the gods. To the Egyptians, this was not architecture. This was the technology of resurrection. The pharaoh's soul after death was believed to ascend through these shafts, traveling along the light beams of the stars, towards Orion, the kingdom of Osiris, where he would be reborn among the stars. The pyramid itself was a machine for immortality. What if Giza was not just mimicking the stars, but memorializing them, a cosmic monument to the world before the flood? The astronomical model reinforces the link. When the Giza-Orion alignment was at its peak around 10,500 BC, the constellation Leo rose on the exact eastern horizon, the very place the Sphinx is facing. The lion-bodied statue, eroded by ancient rains, may represent the age of Leo, the very era when the Orion alignment was perfect. Together, the Sphinx and the pyramids mark a cosmic dateline, a dual signature of time and myth. Whatever the explanation, one truth remains. The Great Pyramid is not a static tomb frozen in stone. It is a clock that measures eons, not years. And if it truly points to 10,500 BC, it may hold the memory of a lost chapter of human history, a civilization wiped from the face of the earth, but not from the stars. In the next part, we will step inside that silent stone heart, the place called the King's Chamber, to confront another mystery. A room with no inscriptions, no treasure, and no body. What purpose, in a structure built with such cosmic precision, could such emptiness serve? When you cross the narrow threshold of the King's Chamber, the outside world seems to dissolve. The air is thick, heavy, almost metallic, and absolutely still. Massive blocks of red granite, cut with impossible precision, press in from all sides. It is a weight you can feel in your chest. But the most striking thing is the emptiness. There is not one painting on the walls, not one carving, not one hieroglyph to explain its purpose. Nothing to identify it as the resting place of a pharaoh. There is only a rectangular granite box near the western wall. It is chipped, hollow, and has no lid. It sits there like an echo waiting for a sound. This is supposed to be the tomb of Khufu, the pinnacle of Egypt's most ambitious project. But while other royal burial chambers are filled with writing, gold, and ritual texts, this room is utterly bare. Its silence feels intentional, almost defiant. Archaeologists call it austere. Others call it forgotten. But perhaps it is something else entirely. Let's start with the most obvious contradiction. Not one human remain, not a bone fragment, not a shard of coffin, not even a trace of embalming resin, has ever been found inside the Great Pyramid. The granite box, often called a sarcophagus, is completely empty, and its interior shows no sign of ever having held a body. The box itself is also too large to fit through the narrow corridors that lead here. This means it had to have been placed in this position during construction, long before the pyramid was sealed. But if it was made for a royal burial, why install it before there was a mummy? And why leave it without a lid, without inscriptions, without burial goods? Compare this to the tomb of Tutankhamun, discovered intact in 1922. The walls were covered in sacred texts. The rooms were filled with 5,000 artifacts. The air was still thick with the scent of perfume oils after 3,000 years. That is what a pharaoh's tomb looks like. The Great Pyramid, by contrast, feels less like a burial place and more like a calculation room, a machine. When you look closer at its architecture, the tomb theory collapses further. The internal passages form a layout unlike any other known Egyptian tomb. The grand gallery soars with the symmetry of a machine bay, its walls corbelled as if designed to channel or contain some force. And above the king's chamber, 5 relieving chambers distribute the weight across massive, interlocking granite beams. An extraordinary feat of load management. For a simple tomb, such engineering is absurdly redundant. It is like building a nuclear reactor, just to protect a single coffin. And then, there is the sound. Sound behaves strangely here. A low hum generated inside the king's chamber will reverberate through the granite until your chest vibrates with it. At a frequency of 440 hertz, the standard A of modern music, the room begins to resonate. But at 432 hertz, the resonance becomes profound, creating standing waves that travel the length of the structure. Later microphonic tests revealed harmonic frequencies that match, astonishingly, the natural resonant frequency of the Earth itself, the so-called Schumann resonance. This room somehow appears to have been tuned to the planet. When physicist Tom Danley performed acoustic mapping in 1998, he found that the chamber amplifies frequencies from 90 to 120 hertz, a range associated with low vibratory states that affect human perception. People inside often describe a sense of spatial expansion, disorientation, even altered consciousness. Could this be intentional? If so, the pyramid may have functioned as a kind of resonant temple, designed not for the dead, but for the living. A space where sound, vibration, and geometry merged to produce transformative states. The ancient Egyptians believed the soul, or Ka, could travel between worlds through the harmonics of sound. Priests chanted in specific tones, believing these frequencies opened pathways to the divine. Was the Great Pyramid the ultimate instrument of that belief? The idea gains power when you remember the building material. The granite inside the pyramid is rich in quartz. When subjected to pressure or sound, quartz creates an electrical response. That is piezoelectricity. Now combine millions of tons of that piezoelectric material in perfect geometric harmony, and you have something that functions like a massive energy transducer. Could this be why no torch soot was ever found inside? Why no lamps were needed? Some have theorized that the resonance itself created luminous phenomena, faint plasma discharges or piezoelectric light, illuminating the chambers with a natural glow. We may never prove this conclusively, but it suggests that the pyramid's emptiness is not an oversight. It is the design. The absence of decoration is not a lack of faith, but the opposite. It is the belief that the divine can be expressed through precision alone. To its builders, the symmetry was the sacred text. But this view raises an even greater paradox. If the Great Pyramid was not a tomb, what was its purpose? And if it wasn't Khufu's engineers who tuned this stone machine to the heartbeat of the earth, Then, who were they? By the 21st century, technology was advanced enough to probe these hidden questions. Muon detectors, ground-penetrating radar, and satellite imaging began to peel back the layers of limestone, revealing corridors, voids, and subterranean networks never seen before. Each discovery seemed to whisper the same message: we still understand nothing. The 21st century brought new eyes. Not the prying eyes of archaeologists or tomb robbers, but the eyes of physics. Eyes that can see through millions of tons of limestone into places the sun has not touched since they were sealed. For centuries we believed we knew the Great Pyramid. We had measured its corridors, mapped its chambers, and argued over their emptiness. We believed that, while the mystery of its purpose remained, its physical architecture was thoroughly explored. We were wrong. Beginning in 2015, an international collaborative project called Scan Pyramids began using a revolutionary technology: muon tomography. Imagine this. Every second, billions of subatomic particles called muons, born from cosmic rays striking the atmosphere, are showering the Earth. They travel at nearly the speed of light. These invisible particles can penetrate hundreds of meters of solid rock. Just as a medical X-ray can distinguish bone from tissue, muon detectors can distinguish solid stone from air. We are using the cosmos itself to X-ray our most mysterious ancient structure. And in 2017, the team announced a discovery that shook the foundations of Egyptology. Deep inside the structure, located directly above the majestic Grand Gallery, was something no one expected. A void. A great empty space, dubbed the Scan Pyramid's Big Void. It is not a small chamber or a crack. It is a massive structure, at least 30 meters long, nearly the length of a modern passenger jet. It runs parallel to the Grand Gallery below it, like a dark reflection. A vast, perfectly sealed, previously unknown and completely empty space. The immediate reaction from academics was to find an engineering explanation. It must be, they argued, another relieving chamber. Like the 5 stacked rooms above the king's chamber, this void was built to take the weight off the millions of tons of stone, protecting the fragile ceiling of the Grand Gallery below. This is a logical, safe explanation. But as with everything else at Giza, the simplest explanation is rarely the most complete. If it was purely an engineering structure, why this exact size and shape? Why hide it so perfectly? The pyramid builders were masters of precision. They did not waste space. They did nothing without purpose. And then, the memory of sound returns. Remember the king's chamber, a room acoustically tuned to the Earth's frequency. Remember the Grand Gallery, with its strange, corbelled architecture, acting as a massive resonator, channeling sound upward. Now imagine you place a giant, precisely engineered void directly above that resonator. What do you have? You have an instrument, a complex, multi-layered sound machine. The big void could have acted as a giant Helmholtz resonance chamber, designed to alter, amplify, or even absorb specific frequencies generated from below. Was this emptiness the very key to the Giza machine's function? And that was not all. The same technology detected another hidden corridor, located just behind the north face, near the original entrance. Another corridor leading where? The new technology wasn't just looking inside, it was looking under. Ground-penetrating radar, GPR, has scanned the limestone bedrock beneath the entire Giza plateau. Below the Sphinx, surveys have long indicated anomalies. Square, man-made spaces that appear to be chambers, deep beneath its paws. Beneath the Great Pyramid itself, the radar shows what appear to be tunnels and hollows, an unexplored network, below even the enigmatic subterranean chamber. It evokes the oldest legend of Giza, the myth of the Hall of Records, an underground library supposedly built by survivors of a great flood, perhaps from Atlantis, containing the knowledge of a lost world. For centuries, this myth was dismissed as fantasy, but now, as our tools finally catch up to the scale of the monument, we are finding voids, hidden chambers, sealed corridors, exactly where the legends said they should be. Where do we stand in this great story? We, the people of the 21st century, may be the first generation in millennia to not just stare at the pyramid's exterior, but to begin to read the hidden message within it. The Great Pyramid is not a static monument of the past. It is an actively unfolding puzzle. Each new discovery does not answer old questions. It poses new, more profound ones. It is not a tomb. It is not just a star map. It is not just an instrument. It may be all of those things. And above all, it is an heirloom. A challenge written in geometry, in sound, and in silence. A message that has waited 4,500 years, or perhaps 12,000, for a civilization advanced enough, not just to admire it, but to understand it. As we fall asleep, remember that the Giza Plateau does not sleep. It is still humming with hidden frequencies and filled with unexplored spaces. The stones are not silent. They are keeping watch, and in their silence they hold the memory of who we once were, and perhaps the key to what we might become. The Great Pyramid is a far more mysterious structure than we ever imagined. In the next part, we will descend once more beyond the known chambers, into the hidden tunnels and sealed voids that modern science is only just beginning to uncover. Because if the Great Pyramid truly predates Egypt itself, then somewhere deep inside it, the evidence may still be preserved. Not of who was buried, but of those who once lived and built, before history began. Beneath the sand, beneath the tourist trails and the incessant clicking of cameras lies another Egypt, an Egypt the public never sees. Down there, in the dark underbelly of the Giza Plateau, the stone gives way to silence. The wind stops, the light dies, and the weight of history presses down, much like the very rock that conceals it. For centuries, explorers believed the Great Pyramid stood alone, isolated and self-contained. But modern technology has begun to reveal something astonishing. The pyramid is only the surface of a much larger mystery, an ancient network buried deep underground. This discovery, like so many great ones, began not with a shovel, but with a subatomic particle. In 2015, a team of scientists from Cairo University and Nagoya University in Japan launched the Scan Pyramids project. It was an ambitious effort to see inside Egypt's monuments using muon tomography, a form of cosmic ray imaging. Unlike radar or ultrasound, muon scanning detects subatomic particles constantly raining down from space, passing through the stone and recording subtle differences in density. It is the same technique physicists use to examine the inside of volcanoes and nuclear reactors. For nearly 2 years, detectors placed within the pyramid's chambers and around its base silently collected data. When the final results were processed, they revealed something no one expected. A massive void hidden directly above the Grand Gallery. It was not a crack or a natural pocket. It was an intentional structure, at least 30 meters long, located in the central core of the pyramid. The data was clear. This was not an error in the masonry, but a chamber, a space deliberately carved and sealed thousands of years ago. When these findings were published in the journal Nature in 2017, the world of Egyptology was shaken. Was this the lost burial chamber of Khufu? An engineering void? Or something much older? The team called it the Big Void, careful not to speculate, but others were less cautious. Some noted its position mirrored the Grand Gallery below, as if forming a symmetrical counterpart, perhaps an architectural resonance chamber. Others pointed to legends of hidden archives buried within the Great Pyramid, records from a forgotten age. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities reacted with silence, then restriction. Requests to drill or probe further were denied. The official explanation was to preserve the structure. The unofficial explanation was to preserve the official story. Since then, new data has only deepened the mystery. In 2023, an updated muon scan revealed a narrow corridor, about 9 meters long, concealed behind the pyramid's northern face, just above the original entrance. 3D models show it leading to a sealed chamber, potentially intersecting with other, larger voids, deeper inside. Endoscopic cameras, fed through micro-drilled holes, have captured images of smooth limestone walls, untouched by human hands for millennia. No inscriptions, no tools, no evidence of robbery. Just an empty, pristine, and intentional void. At the same time, ground-penetrating radar GPR surveys around the pyramid's base have detected a series of linear anomalies, patterns that do not fit natural geology. These are not random fissures, but structured voids, forming grid-like corridors that extend beneath the plateau. Further out, between the pyramid and the Sphinx, researchers have mapped regions of unusual low density, extending more than 40 meters down. Some form perfect right angles. Others connect to known tombs, but then continue far beyond their documented limits. Could these be natural cracks? Possibly, but beneath Giza, the word natural rarely applies. History itself suggests these discoveries are not new. The Greek historian Herodotus, visiting Egypt in the 5th century BC, wrote of subterranean passages and an underground lake beneath the pyramid, where Khufu's body supposedly rested on an island. For centuries, scholars dismissed this as myth. Yet modern surveys have confirmed the presence of large, moisture-filled cavities, ancient groundwater sealed in the rock for millennia, lying directly beneath the pyramid's foundation. In 1837, Colonel Howard Weiss, the same man who found Khufu's cartouche, blasted his way into a deep shaft below the Great Pyramid's descending corridor. He discovered a rough-hewn chamber he called the subterranean room. Carved directly into the bedrock, it resembles an unfinished tomb, yet it bears no sign of burial, no sarcophagus, no inscriptions. Some engineers now believe it predates the pyramid itself, perhaps the remnant of an earlier structure, or a core excavation reused by later builders. The French archaeologist Auguste Mariette, exploring the area in the 1850s, described tunnels as endless as their own antiquity, leading from the Sphinx toward the Nile. In the 20th century, the notes of British explorer Howard Weiss, whom we've mentioned, also referred to unexplained air currents near sealed doorways, suggesting interconnected chambers below. These clues persisted, but they were ignored, overshadowed by the majesty above ground. Modern geology adds another layer to the puzzle. Core drill samples taken from around Giza show thick layers of Nile mud alternating between layers of bedrock. This indicates the plateau experienced massive flooding long before the dynastic era. When was the last time the Nile reached that height? It was during the Younger Dryas Ice Age, some 11,000 to 12,000 years ago. The same period that geologists now associate with global cataclysmic floods. If structures existed below the surface then, they would have been buried, perfectly preserved under sediment, and millennia later, rediscovered by the first dynasties of Egypt. This is not just speculation. In 1992, seismic studies conducted by geophysicist Thomas Dobecki and archaeologist John Anthony West near the Sphinx revealed something shocking. They detected hollow cavities located directly beneath the statue's left forepaw. They were rectangular, symmetrical, and in their words, definitely man-made. The reaction was immediate. Egyptian officials quickly sealed off the area, forbidding all further exploration. When reporters pressed for comment, the answer was curt. There are no plans for further investigation. To this day, those cavities remain unverified. So, what are these hidden networks beneath Giza? Are they storerooms, construction ramps, or something far older, something that predates the first recorded kings? Some researchers believe the subterranean passages once formed an elaborate ritual complex where priests reenacted the pharaoh's journey through the underworld. But others, more daring, propose they are the remnants of a pre-dynastic archive of knowledge. They call it the legendary Hall of Records, a place described in both ancient Egyptian lore and by later mystics, like Edgar Cayce. Cayce's claim, dismissed by mainstream academia, described a hidden library buried between the paws of the Sphinx. It supposedly contained the records from a lost civilization, Atlantis, preserved against a global cataclysm. While this story remains unproven, there is one remarkable fact. Ground-penetrating radar has indeed confirmed a large, structured cavity lying beneath that exact spot, sealed and unviolated. Whether it contains Atlantean records or not, something is definitely there. And perhaps that is the point. Every new scan, every new survey, continues to confirm the same thing. The Giza Plateau is hollow. It is threaded with passages and voids, challenging all our assumptions of a simple pyramid built on solid rock. The ancient builders didn't just build up, they built deep down. If the Great Pyramid is the tip of an iceberg, its true story lies below. The corridors beneath may be older than the pyramid's stones, dating to a civilization erased by flood or time. Perhaps the pharaohs of Egypt found these ancient crypts and, recognizing their importance, decided to build their great works directly above them, claiming their legacy as their own. Imagine for a moment, just beneath every step you take on the plateau, tunnels stretch into endless darkness. Their walls may be carved with forgotten symbols, their chambers sealed since the dawn of history. They wait, perfectly preserved, like the hard drives of an ancient world. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere in that darkness is the final piece of the puzzle. The proof that the Great Pyramid was not an Egyptian original, but a gift or an inheritance from a civilization far older than we ever dared to imagine. We will follow that thread to its final conclusion. The echo of an age that may have ended in catastrophe 12,000 years ago, and the possibility that the Great Pyramid was built, not as a tomb, but as a message, a monument of survival from before time began. Dawn at Giza. The first light touches the apex of the Great Pyramid, turning limestone to solid gold. The city beyond is still asleep, unaware that beneath this quiet horizon lies the weight of an entire forgotten world. For thousands of years, the monument has stood as if waiting for the right tools, the right minds, the right moment to speak again. By now, we have seen the cracks in the official story. The painted name of Khufu is suspicious. The dating methods are flawed. The construction techniques are impossible for the Bronze Age. The precision is beyond reason, the mathematics cosmic, the alignment stellar from a prehistoric time, and the tunnels beneath stretch into forbidden depths. They all whisper the same question. What civilization built this? And what catastrophe erased it? Ancient myths, scattered across the planet, all seem to remember fragments of a great destruction. A deluge that submerged the world and buried its memory in mud and ice. Plato wrote of Atlantis, an island empire destroyed in a single day and night of misfortune, around 11,600 years ago, the same era that geologists today link to the Younger Dryas Ice Age. It was when a sudden global melt submerged continents and reset the climate and civilization. Egyptian priests told Plato that their ancestors had only inherited the fragments of a much older world, a world destroyed by fire and flood. They called those survivors the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, demigod-like beings, gods who walked among men, who taught writing, architecture, and the order of the heavens. To the Egyptians, the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx were not the beginning. They were reminders. If that sounds like legend, the Earth itself seems to agree. Around 12,800 years ago, Greenland ice cores record a sudden spike in platinum, a chemical signature of a cosmic impact. Nanodiamonds, glass spherules, and melt layers appear in geological strata from North America to the Middle East. Evidence of a global cataclysm. Sea levels rose over 120 meters in a geological blink of an eye. Entire coastlines vanished. What would survive such a reset? Not cities, not libraries, but perhaps stone. If a civilization existed before that event, call it Atlantis or some nameless name, its survivors would have migrated to the areas spared the worst of the flood. Highlands, delta plains, like the fertile plain of the Nile. There, they might have preserved the fragments of lost knowledge, astronomy, geometry, resonance, and they rebuilt what they could, encoding their science into monuments, durable enough to be indelible. In that light, the Great Pyramid is not a tomb or even a temple. It is a message across the eons, a monument built not to honor a king, but to preserve the memory of a civilization scoured from time. And then, the numbers begin to align. The date of the Orion correlation, 10,500 BC. The end of the Younger Dryas, 9,600 BC. The sudden appearance of advanced sites like Göbekli Tepe in Anatolia, with its megalithic architecture and complex celestial alignments, appearing as if from nowhere. These are not individual sparks of genius. They are the embers of a forgotten fire, the same blueprint rising again in scattered hands. Perhaps the builders of the Great Pyramid were the heirs of that fire, refugees of a deluge who encoded their world's knowledge into an indestructible format. The limestone casing represented the earth. The granite core represented energy. The shafts pointed up, not for air, but as pathways for the soul. The geometry was the language. The proportion was the memory. Everything they knew, mathematics, astronomy, time, folded into a single, timeless structure. And perhaps they knew it would not be understood. Perhaps that was the point. The pyramid was not built for its contemporaries. It was built for whoever would rediscover it after the next cycle of destruction. It is a cosmic archive, a seed for civilization's rebirth. This idea of cycles runs through every ancient culture. The Hindus spoke of the yugas, repeating ages of rise and fall. The Maya described the 5 suns, each world destroyed and remade. The Egyptians themselves believed in a periodic flooding of Nun, the primordial waters that reset creation. Even modern science, though in a different way, now recognizes the Earth's catastrophic pattern, recurring events that can change everything, sudden climate shifts, magnetic reversals, cosmic impact winters. If the Great Pyramid dates from such a turning point, some 12,000 years ago, then its builders may have known what we are only rediscovering, that civilization is not a straight line forward, it is a circle. We rise, we fall, we forget, and we begin again. Perhaps that is why the pyramid endures, not as evidence of one lost civilization, but as the pulse of many, a heartbeat of memory through the ages. Its silence is intentional. Its perfection is a language we are only just beginning to read. And the voids discovered inside, the tunnels below, perhaps they hold more than air and sand. Perhaps they hold a recording waiting to be awakened, not by words, but by resonance, a frequency that one day, when rediscovered, will vibrate once more and tell the story of the first time. For now, the monument waits. Each dawn, the sun climbs its face, just as it has for millennia, tracing the same lines, illuminating the same stone. The earth turns, the stars shift, the ages pass, but the pyramid does not move. It is the stationary needle as time spins around it. Perhaps that is the final secret, that the Great Pyramid was built long before Egypt, not as a relic of death, but as a mirror for the living, to remind whoever came after that we have been here before. And as night falls once more, its shadow stretches out toward the stars it once mirrored, silent, eternal, watching, waiting for us to remember. These images are perhaps still seared into our minds. The eerily empty streets of a paralyzed world, skies choked with smoke from burning forests, and the echo of conflict, of war, in places we thought were at peace. In just one short decade, humanity seems to have faced a rapid succession of calamities. A pandemic, war, famine, and natural disasters of unimaginable destructive power. A disturbing reality emerges. Never in our living memory has the world felt so fragile. And in the face of that fragility, some have begun to look to the past, searching for answers in an ancient text. They are afraid because what is happening seems to have been described in detail in the book of Revelation from over 2,000 years ago. Revelation, the only prophetic book and the final book of the Bible. Its content is not long, but it contains the most intense and terrifying symbolic images. It describes the final moments, the judgment, and the end of the world. With what we are witnessing, the unavoidable question is asked: is the end near? Is the Great Tribulation as described beginning? And if so, is there any way to overcome it? To find the answers, we must begin where it all starts, from the first seals. The book of Revelation describes that when the Lamb, a symbol of Christ, opens the first 4 of the 7 seals of the Book of Destiny, 4 creatures will appear. They ride on horses of 4 different colors: white, red, black, and a pale ashen gray. They are called the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. These 4 horsemen are not imaginary figures for entertainment, as Hollywood often portrays them. In the original text, they are entities carrying specific missions. Each represents a calamity to befall humanity: pestilence, war, famine, and death. For centuries, these prophecies seemed to lie dormant. Humans were preoccupied with scientific progress, with space exploration, and believed we had mastered our own destiny. Until 2019. The White Horseman the first arrived. In most legends, he rides a white horse, carrying a bow and a crown. He represents conquest, and in many modern interpretations, he is the symbol of spreading pestilence. an invisible conqueror sweeping the entire globe, sowing suffering and bringing death. He cleanses the earth of the sins man has caused. The COVID-19 pandemic erupted. It spread with a speed and scale unprecedented in modern history. The entire world shut down. The global economy stalled. According to the World Health Organization, WHO, in the first 2 years alone, from 2020 to the end of 2021, the number of lives lost, directly or indirectly related to the pandemic, was approximately 14.9 million people. It reached every corner, affected every family. The White Horseman had completed his task devastatingly. Fortunately, with the extraordinary efforts of science, by the end of 2021, the pandemic was largely brought under control. Vaccines were rolled out. Humanity breathed a sigh of relief. Many believed the White Horseman had finally been subdued. We were temporarily safe. At that time, the world, apart from small conflict hotspots, seemed to be on the road to recovery. There was no sign that the next horseman was ready. But they were wrong. Just as the White Horseman reined in, the Red Horseman appeared. He rides a horse red as fire and is given a great sword with the power to take peace from the earth so that people would slaughter one another. He is the symbol of war. February 2022. The war between Russia and Ukraine broke out. The whole world was horrified, not just because it was happening in Europe, but because of its scale and nature. This was not a small regional conflict. This was the largest scale war on the European continent since World War II. It was large enough to represent an apocalyptic horseman. This war did not just pull two nations into a spiral of violence. It shook the world order, realigned alliances, and relentlessly escalated global tensions. To this day, that fire of war shows no sign of stopping. The first two horsemen had descended, exactly in the order described. First was pestilence, and immediately after was war. This leads to a more urgent and terrifying question. If the first two are already here, then the third horseman, the Black Horseman, who represents famine, when will he arrive? The answer is, the Black Horseman doesn't seem to need to arrive. He has always been lurking somewhere in this world, in the hidden corners of wealth, where life is forgotten. It is just that, when the Red Horseman swings his sword, he becomes more terrifying, more dangerous, and more present than ever before. In the book of Revelation, the third horseman rides a black horse. He carries no weapon of destruction. Instead, in his hand is a pair of scales. The color black is often associated with decay, with night, with the lament of starvation. His scales carry a dual meaning. They are a symbol of food scarcity, as every grain of wheat, every drop of oil is measured out stringently. They are also a symbol of power and injustice, where rulers impose laws on the lower classes, doling out meager scraps to the poor, while keeping luxuries for themselves. And in our world, those scales have just tipped devastatingly to one side. A report from the UN's World Food Program, WFP, in 2022 painted a picture we cannot ignore. They called it a food crisis of a severity not seen in decades. The numbers do not lie. Nearly 1 billion people on this planet go to bed with an empty stomach every night. More alarmingly, the number of people facing acute food insecurity, meaning they do not know where their next meal is coming from, has more than doubled worldwide. From 135 million people in 2019, that number has skyrocketed to 345 million people. And among them, nearly 50 million are on the literal brink of death. They are starving. The majority of them are in Africa and the Middle East. Before the conflict in Ukraine erupted, the world already had 276 million victims of famine. But the Ukraine crisis alone, the WFP estimates, has pushed nearly 50 million more people into this catastrophe, bringing the total to 323 million. Why? Why can a war in Eastern Europe cause famine in Africa? The answer lies in the position of Russia and Ukraine on the global food map. These two nations don't just dominate the market for fertilizer and fossil fuels, which are critical for agriculture. They are, quite literally, the breadbasket of the world. In 2021, both Russia and Ukraine were among the world's top 3 exporters of wheat, barley, corn, rapeseed, and especially sunflower oil. For countless nations dependent on these imports, the war has dealt a fatal blow to the agricultural trade balance. First, Ukraine's output plummeted. In 2022, their wheat production fell 20% compared to the previous year. For sunflower and corn, the numbers were even worse, a 40% drop. Fertile fields turned into battlefields. Next, sanctions and trade restrictions imposed on Russia made available supplies suddenly scarce. The global supply chain, already fragile after the pandemic, was now severely disrupted. And when supply is scarce, prices skyrocket. The fear of shortages caused several other major grain-producing nations, like India and China, to abruptly reduce exports to increase their domestic reserves. The consequences, as always, fall on the most vulnerable. On the Black Continent, the disaster is stark. Somalia, an already destitute nation, imported 100% of its wheat from Russia and Ukraine. Sudan, the figure was 75%. When the breadbasket burns, they have no alternative. The Black Horseman, the symbol of famine, is truly terrifying. He does not destroy en masse with pestilence like the White Horseman. He does not slaughter quickly with war like the Red Horseman. He brings a slow, agonizing death, an erosion of life force and desperation. Famine is, and always has been raging. But now, the hoofbeats of the Black Horseman are growing louder, and this foretells the arrival of the final horseman, the horseman who rides the pale, ashen horse, the only horseman who needs no weapon, for he himself is the weapon. His name is Death. The four horsemen have descended: pestilence, war, famine, and lurking death. But in the book of Revelation, the picture of the world's end does not stop there. The text describes many other plagues and abnormal phenomena that humanity will have to endure. It is the wrath of the gods, poured out upon the whole earth. 7 angels will bring 7 great plagues, signaled by 7 trumpets. And sadly, those phenomena also seem to be gradually coming true, making people unable to help but feel afraid. Let us turn to the 8th chapter of the book of Revelation, verse 7. The first angel sounded his trumpet, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and it was hurled down on the earth. 1/3 of the earth was burned up, 1/3 of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. This is a dark vision, a cleansing fire that incinerates the planet's vegetation. Let's go back to early 2020, at the same time the White Horseman was beginning his journey. The entire world held its breath watching the Black Summer bushfire disaster in Australia. The fire raged persistently, so intense it seemed impossible to extinguish. By March 2020, the fires had spread over 12 million hectares, destroying thousands of buildings and claiming the lives of at least 34 people. But the most horrific number was ecological. Nearly 3 billion terrestrial animals, mostly reptiles, birds, and mammals, were affected, either incinerated or having lost their habitat. Some endangered species were thought to have gone completely extinct. Toxic smoke blanketed the southern and eastern states. Nearly 80% of Australia's population was affected. That giant plume of smoke traveled 11,000 kilometers, crossing the Pacific Ocean to reach as far as Chile and Argentina, while releasing an enormous amount of CO2. And that was not all. In 2019, before that, humanity had also witnessed the Amazon, the lungs of the planet, burning fiercely, along with large-scale, unprecedented wildfires in many U.S. states. Could it be that this is the fulfillment of the prophecy of the first great plague, the burning of grass and trees on earth? But it did not stop there. The second angel appeared. Verse 8, chapter 8 reads, "The second angel sounded his trumpet, and something like a huge mountain all ablaze was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea turned into blood." And in chapter 16, when the angels pour out their vials of wrath, the description is even clearer. The second angel poured out his bowl on the sea, and it turned into blood like that of a dead person, and every living thing in the sea died. The third angel poured out his bowl on the rivers and springs of water, and they became blood. Water turning to blood, a phenomenon that sounds fantastical, unrealistic. But on September 12, 2017, in Jiangxi Province, China, residents were horrified to discover the river they lived by had suddenly turned bright red. Some witnesses reported smelling a pungent odor, like the smell of blood, rising from the water. Local officials investigated and found a wastewater pipe from a pig slaughterhouse. They claimed the pipe had broken. But this explanation was unsatisfactory. A representative from the slaughterhouse said the pig blood was diluted and treated according to regulations before being discharged. The treated wastewater could not have been such a bright red. Furthermore, the question was asked, how many pigs would have to be slaughtered to be able to dye an entire major river red? And this was not an isolated case. The Patoka River in India, the Eltra Crag River in Canada, the Daldaikan River in Russia, the Northamptonshire River in England. Many water sources around the world have unexpectedly turned blood red. Scientists offer many reasons, due to algal blooms, due to dye pollution, due to high salt concentrations, or due to iron oxidizing from nearby mines. But there are also cases where the real cause remains a mystery. While the world was still struggling with the White Horsemen, another plague, also described in the book of Revelation, occurred. Chapter 9, describing the fifth angel. From the smoke locusts came down on the earth, and they were given power like that of scorpions. The locusts looked like horses prepared for battle. Their faces resembled human faces. Year 2020. Kenya faced its worst desert locust plague in nearly a century. Billions of insects originating from Northeast Africa swarmed in from Somalia and Ethiopia. A single swarm in Kenya was recorded covering an area of about 2,400 square kilometers. The estimated number in that swarm, nearly 200 billion. They destroyed at least 70,000 hectares of crops, seriously threatening food security in 3 nations already in a constant state of crop failure. A locust can eat its own weight in food every day. Just one medium-sized swarm in one day can destroy enough crops to feed 2,500 people for a year. They covered the ground, eating everything in their path, not just vegetation. Records describe them eating the cloth blankets covering vegetable gardens, the bark of carriages, leather harnesses, and even the clothes on people's backs. The locust plague, a clear and terrifying image, not only fulfills the prophecy visually, but is also a perfect metaphor for the Black Horseman, famine, that we just mentioned in the previous part. The prophecies seem to be intertwining. We continue with the 9th chapter of the book of Revelation. The 5th trumpet sounds. The 5th angel sounded his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth, and the star was given the key to the abyss. When he opened the abyss, smoke rose from it like the smoke from a gigantic furnace. The sun and sky were darkened by the smoke from the abyss. There is no need to explain much. Any one of us understands. This is a perfect description of a meteor disaster. A meteor large enough, colliding with the Earth, would create a fiery pit like an abyss. Rock and smoke and dust would swirl up, plunging the world into darkness, blocking out the sun for months, even years. A nuclear winter, but caused by the cosmos. Fortunately, to this day, this prophecy has not yet come true. But if it had, we probably wouldn't have the chance to sit here and discuss it. But does humanity passively sit and wait for destruction? The answer is no. This threat is not theoretical. In March 1989, a meteor named 4581, with a diameter of over 800 meters, skimmed Earth's orbit. It was only 740,000 kilometers from our planet. A number that sounds large, but in space, it's nothing more than a hand's breadth. If it had hit the Earth, the explosion would be equivalent to 200 thermonuclear bombs. It would leave a crater 1.6 kilometers deep, 16 kilometers in diameter, destroying all life within a radius of hundreds of miles. And the amount of dust it put out would be exactly what is described in the book of Revelation. Therefore, humans began to act. The U.S. Space Agency, NASA, by 2010, had identified 90% of the meteors with a diameter of 1 kilometer or more flying near Earth. We track them because there is no guarantee that one day they won't change orbit and head straight for us. But tracking is not enough. Humans decided something must be done. We must find a way to fight back. A historic project was established, the Double Asteroid Redirection Test, or DART. This is humanity's first attempt to test a technique called kinetic impactor, or simply put, using a spacecraft to crash into a meteor to make it change direction. The chosen target was a harmless double asteroid system, far from Earth, named 65,803 Didymos. It consists of a main asteroid, Didymos, 780 meters in diameter, and a smaller moon asteroid orbiting it, named Dimorphos, 160 meters in diameter. In 2021, the DART spacecraft, the size of just a small car, was launched into space. It took nearly a year to travel through the darkness, flying towards its target. And then, on September 26, 2022, the moment arrived. 11 million kilometers from Earth, the DART spacecraft successfully crashed into the asteroid Dimorphos at a terrible speed, 21,591 kilometers per hour, or 6,000 meters per second. This is a milestone in human history. The first time, we deliberately changed the motion of a natural celestial body in space. The goal was not to destroy Dimorphos. The DART spacecraft was too small compared to the asteroid, like a car crashing into a pyramid. The goal was a nudge, a collision to change its speed by just 1%, but enough to change its orbit. And it succeeded. Before the impact, Dimorphos took 11 hours and 55 minutes to make one orbit around Didymos. Scientists hoped the impact would shorten that time by 73 seconds. But the actual result far exceeded expectations. Its orbit was changed, reduced by 10 minutes. A small nudge in the cosmos created a massive change. We are entering a new era, an era where humanity proves it has the ability to protect itself from a dangerous object from space. Somehow, we have figured out on our own how to deal with one of the most terrifying plagues prophesied in the book of Revelation.